Welcome, Chosen X. You wake to a whisper that lives behind ordinary sounds, a small insistence folding into the corners of your day until silence cannot contain it. Morning feels borrowed, a bell is struck at the base of your nerves and left a pattern you cannot ignore. This is not a coincidence. The sensation runs like a mapped current through muscle and thought, familiar without origin, ancient without age, and it reshapes the room inside your chest. You have learned the geography of solitude, where privacy becomes a lens that sharpens perception. In that private landscape, attention grows precise. When you lean into soundless signals others miss, compassion becomes an instrument tuned to nuance. Solitude is not exile here, but the field where listening deepens. It gives you the measure to hold both sorrow and gladness without dissolving into either. Small proofs appear, a stranger's paused step, an unshared joke that rings hollow, a hand that hesitates over a mailbox. Those fragments assemble into a pattern you can read. You learn the grammar of quiet distress, the syntax of hidden hope. Every understanding is a small apprenticeship in turning pressure into ease. You trace what is bruised and discover methods to ease its edges. You are chosen not by request but because steadiness sought you out. That steadiness is a practiced craft, carved from nights of honest reckoning and mornings of slow return. You refine speech until words function as instruments rather than blows. You practice restraint until interruptions fail to displace you. You learn to let silence gather meaning like rainwater in a basin. Accepting this quiet authority also brings a weight, measured not by applause but by the subtle continuities you leave behind. When someone trusts you with a story, they seek being acknowledged, not spectacle. Your posture can steady a room, your careful gestures can become harboring spaces. With each act of attention you sew a thread of resilience into a fraying fabric. At first the work was disorienting. You feel the temptation to withdraw, fearing that absorbing others' burdens will fracture you. Some nights the chorus of distant grief follows you home. In those hours you tend your own breath with the same tenderness you offer others. Small rituals become repairs, an unhurried cup, a counted breath, a journal that records without judgment. These are not indulgences. They are instruments of renewal. Signs appear along the way, a stone on an unfamiliar path, a phrase that lands like a key, a child offering scissors with unguarded trust. These do not explain purpose, they remind you that meaning keeps itself secret until readiness arrives. Each sign folds into resolve, shaping a map less about arrival and more about fidelity to attention. As dusk thickens into night you feel the call changing shape. Once a question, it becomes a set of openings. You move through the city tuned to small harms, catching them before they widen, offering words that serve as lifelines, creating a room where none existed. You see the world as a fragile instrument in need of gentle tuning. Your role is not to fix everything but to apply careful pressure in places that matter. The beginning you inhabit is both practical and sacred. It asks no altar and demands no public stage. It starts in rooms where people lower their shields and offer truth. Honor those moments with modest courage. Let them teach you how to balance care with endurance, how to bind wounds without draining yourself. Cultivate a quiet craft in how you listen, move, and return to solitude to refill. Night falls and you stand at a window, palms warm on glass. Below the city hums like a heart with many chambers. You cannot name the full path ahead, only sense its fidelity. You carry a lumen of attention, learn to bear it without seeking praise and without losing the small practices that keep you whole. This is the first step. The current has found you. Be ready at dawn to hold what arrives today. Dawn arrives like a gentle verdict and you feel the new day press against your ribs. Light reveals fragile seams you had not noticed before. Your attention draws what others cannot or will not look at. You do not search for suffering. It arrives like the weather around you, shifting direction as you move. Where you stand, tension loosens its hold on bodies and voices that have been taught for years. You become a place where small truths can surface without shame. Your senses do not turn traitorous, they become tools of immediacy. You notice the way a body pauses when grief approaches and the way a laugh tries to seal over an old wound. These perceptions arrive not as burdens only but as permissions to intervene with small acts that do not demand explanation. You learn to make public space feel private and to make private truths feel less isolating. Carrying this capacity requires techniques that are simple and exact. You learn to make space with your silence and to stitch a sentence that unthreads panic. A steady breath offers someone permission to slow down. An unhurried question clears a room of fog. These gestures are modest in appearance and profound in consequence. They are precise adjustments that prevent harm from widening into harm. Not every encounter asks for rescue. Part of your work is to notice what is meant to be held by someone else. If you take on too much, you will fracture. If you do too little, you will leave wounds unattended. Mastery develops in the margins between these errors. You cultivate edges where compassion operates with discernment. This is not indifference. It is a disciplined generosity that preserves your capacity to give again. There are nights when the city seems to deliver its entire inventory of sorrow to your doorstep. You carry the weight into small rituals that are not showy but are binding. An evening walk with no agenda. A hot drink taken in silence. A list of names you touch with a private prayer. These acts rebuild you quietly so you can return to the task without collapsing. Sometimes the strain is sharp and the ache distorts your clarity. You train to recognize the signs like a watchman reads the horizon. When numbness arrives, you welcome rest before compassion becomes brittle. When anger surfaces, you investigate its source rather than punish yourself. Rest and repair are part of the work. They are defensive gestures as noble as any healing touch. Not everyone will understand. Some will presume you are untroubled and demand more than you can offer. Others will recoil from the nearness you propose. You accept both responses with a calm that does not betray bitterness. Your task is to model how presence can be a practice others learn. By showing steady attention, you teach communities to hold themselves with less collapse and more clarity. You also cultivate allies. There are a few you trust with the ledger of fatigue and the small confessions that must not be carried alone. Together you invent systems of mutual tending, brief handoffs that keep care circulating without draining a single life. In teaching others to notice and to act, the load eases in ways that feel miraculous. The changes you make are not dramatic headlines. They are accumulations of small reversals. A neighborhood begins to speak like a place that remembers its voice. A friend learns to name grief instead of swallowing it. These are not final victories. They are openings that will require tending. You are not a cure but a threshold through which healing can pass. As dusk arrives, you close your hands and feel the weight settle but not consume. You have more maps than answers. Maps point to thresholds and to choices about whether to enter or to step back. You move with a sensibility that balances action and preservation. The burden of light asks of you a steady economy of giving. You walk on, palms open when needed, guarded when necessary, carrying what the day lets you keep. Guard the rhythm, shelter inner light. You carry a tenderness that does not announce itself but alters the air around you. In a crowded waiting room, your glance becomes a soft permission to breathe. In a corridor where accusations circle like restless birds, your presence folds into the silence and creates a small clearing for truth to breathe. This is not showmanship. It is practice cultivated through years of listening and restraint. Each moment of restraint builds a reservoir that you later draw from without spectacle. You commit to a covenant that has no parchment yet binds you more firmly than any oath. The covenant demands humility first and compassion second. Humility opens your hands. Compassion directs them. You do not seek praise. You refuse domination. When someone hands you a story soaked with shame, you cradle it with a kind of reverence reserved for fragile relics. You practice honoring the limits of what belongs to others while stepping toward what asks for your care. The work is embodied and literal. You learn languages of comfort that require no translation. A steady posture near the bedside, a practiced pause after a confession, a soft silence when words fail. These are technical skills as much as virtues. You teach companions to name what hurts, to house grief in a language that does not pulverize identity. You model a rhythm where confession is met with steadiness and not spectacle. This becomes contagious. Communities begin to realign around your habits. Neighbors who once avoided one another sit together at ordinary tables. Families invent new ways of saying sorry. Young people start to ask fewer performance questions and more honest ones. Your influence is not an edict. It is a series of small invitations that accumulate into a culture. You do not command this change. You embody it and others follow because living differently becomes easier by example. Yet there are edges where virtue and intrusion brush. You learn to recognize the boundary between necessary aid and rescue that steals agency. Offering too much can create dependence. Granting too little can leave scars. Mastery takes place in a narrow field between these harms. You cultivate patience as a tool to hold space while autonomy regains shape. In private, you examine motives without cruelty. You are honest about the relief you may feel when another recovers and leaves you less burdened. You are aware of the subtle hunger for gratitude that sometimes rises. Naming such impulses strips them of their power. Then you return to the work with clearer intent. The covenant asks of you rituals that are both austere and tender. You learn to celebrate small recoveries as though they were miracles. You carve out time for quiet review and sometimes for lamentation. You insist on shared accountability with others who tend the same wounded places so your care does not concentrate into a single fragile lamp. Love in your practice is active and disciplined. It is not a feeling only but a set of repeated choices that shape the world through patient repetition. When rage threatens to unmake an encounter, you choose steadiness. When boredom tempts you to look away, you return. These choices are the architecture of trust. As moonlight settles on your neighborhood, you sense how deep the covenant runs. It is not merely a way to comfort individuals. It is a repair of connective tissue that is frayed under hurry and armor. You have learned to move without spectacle to change how people meet one another. There is a quiet authority in this. The next stage will test whether your authority can withstand storms. You prepare to cross that test with steady breath and hands that know how to mend. You will face ruin and rumor and the weight of others' doubts, yet you will also find allies in unexpected margins who mirror your steadiness. Hold to this covenant like a ship holds to a keel and let the smallest miracles accumulate until a new landscape of care unfolds. Keep faith and keep tending. Keep listening. Flames arrive quietly at first, as if ember and wind conspire to ask what you are made of. Night brings lessons that daylight cannot teach, a series of private reckonings where every choice is magnified and the small frailties in your spirit are exposed like maps worn thin by travel. You discover that courage is not the absence of fear but the art of moving through it without renouncing tenderness. In the weeks when rumor gains voice and the sky seems heavy with accusation, you stand in public and feel the weight of other people's astonishments. The press of expectation compresses time and makes decisions feel sharp as glass. You learn quickly that endurance needs discipline rather than drama. There are ways to conserve energy for what matters most and to keep your presence from becoming a beacon that draws every stray sorrow. You practice modest rules, arrive with clarity, keep your language precise, and make space for others to carry their own names. The work of repair is rarely a single grand action. It is a sequence of precise acts that, over months and years, realign what has been pulled apart. Tests will not arrive labeled with warnings. A friend with brittle loyalty will ask for more than you can safely give. An institution built on convenience will demand assent to habits that erode the good you intend to protect. There will be nights when loneliness impersonates righteousness and whispers that retreat is wisdom. In those hours you must remember the ledger of small recoveries you have kept in the faces that bent toward steadiness. Resilience becomes a craft of daily practice. You build it with acts that are modest in spectacle yet exact in effect. A timely silence amid fury. A precise question that converts panic into a plan. A brief ritual that returns adrenaline to deliberation. You ration emotional currency and invest it where compound good occurs. This is not calculation without heart. It is a strategy of devotion that preserves capacity while amplifying outcomes. There are moments when doubt arrives as a tidal truth, sweeping memories and plans into churn. In those moments you practice radical attending to what remains. You list concrete acts you have performed and name changes traceable to your presence. You reach for allies who have weathered storms and ask for honest appraisal rather than comfort. This exchange becomes a shield. It turns private despair into communal strategy and converts confusion into a map of next steps. Sacrifice will be required but not romanticized. The image of burning out as proof of worth is a myth you refuse. Instead, you design intervals of repair with the same care you give to crises. You protect days with boundaries that are gentle and durable. You practice saying no to well-meaning demands that would hollow the work. You admit when your strength needs restoration and make repair a public skill rather than a private shame. Confrontations will test not just skill but identity. When slander or misunderstanding spreads like taint, you act with stubborn clarity. You correct false notes with facts and with a demeanor that refuses escalation. There is power in editing your own narrative while remaining open to correction that comes from truth rather than gossip. This posture preserves trust and deters those who feed on chaos. Through it all, you find the deepest victories are small and often unseen. A child who sleeps through the night. A neighbor who stops flinching at loud voices. A council that accepts a new protocol to tend the bereaved. These increments stitch a different world slowly yet irreversibly. You measure progress in tenderness rather than headlines. As the storm loosens and the first cleansed air returns, you stand with callous patience and a clarified purpose. The trial reveals brutal seams and unexpected strengths that live there. You take stock, mend what can be mended, and release what cannot be carried forward. Then you step toward the next horizon with hands that remember how to repair and a heart calibrated to danger and grace. The road beyond this test asks for subtler courage, the kind that chooses empathy even when it costs everything. You pause at the threshold, knowing that what follows will demand not only courage but also steadier compassion that can hold contradiction. Breathe and gather the familiar implements of care, the small liturgies that restore you. Walk forward without fear, for the trial has tempered you and the next chapter will call you to another kind of fidelity. At the edge of everything, you have learned how to sit with silence so truth may settle. Where confusion once crowded your thoughts, a clearer map forms from patient work. You sense patterns in tender gestures and find a language for what cannot be spoken. Completion does not arrive as a single answer but as a deeper knowing carried into ordinary days. Your hands remember how to touch without pressure, how to hold a moment so someone else can breathe. Lessons of sacrifice and endurance have refined you into someone who moves with intention rather than force. You no longer react to need, you select places where attention yields renewal. This selection is stewardship, a careful tending that honors both mourner and shared fabric. People who once turned away now pause and listen. Small practices become an ecosystem of care, repeated kindness, and rewriting expectations. Communities rebuilt by such habits reclaim rhythm one ordinary morning at a time. As dusk settles, you reflect on the arc of service you have woven. You carried burdens without spectacle and found allies who matched your steadiness. Some nights remain heavy, but you carry rituals that restore and keep attention sustainable. From these repairs you craft a philosophy: resilience is public, repair is communal. Where rumor once loosened trust, you applied clarity and patience. Where doubt threatened resolve, you answered with steady presence. Those actions accumulate into a public memory that favors healing over chaos. A new layer of work unfolds. Wisdom inherited from trials must become teachable. Without grand claims, you model care so others copy and adapt. You stage brief trainings at kitchen tables and park benches, showing small moves that steady frantic rooms. Each demonstration seeds one more keeper of space. Each keeper multiplies quiet repair across neighborhoods. This growth does not scorch the landscape but creates a network of gentle competence that catches suffering before it fractures life. You design private rituals that anchor your water taken at dusk, a list of names held without judgment, a line of verse that sharpens intention. These rites resist spectacle and ensure service does not hollow your sender. Some thresholds require you to shift roles from mender to witness. At those gates you release the urge to own outcomes and learn to love the process. Language shifts from fixing to accompanying, from solving to guiding. Impact is measured by how many can now carry burdens with renewed skill. This quiet victory endures. In waning hours an invitation arrives like a familiar bell, soothing yet new enough to inspire. It speaks of gatherings where sight and sound amplify the lessons you embody. The invitation includes a recorded horizon where visual presence extends the guidance you have learned. View that offering with the same care you bring to a bedside. It will reveal gestures to mirror and hold silences that teach. If the work resonates, make a modest pledge. Subscribe so the conversation continues into mornings and evenings that follow. Enable notifications to be summoned when new gatherings form and when the next chapter appears. Subscription is not a commodity, it is a covenant between a learner and a wider circle of tending hearts. When alerts arrive, you will be invited back into practice, not spectacle. Choose this path if it helps you hold steadiness. Carry light into common rooms, let lessons multiply and return often to the moving images that serve as a seedbed of renewal. Share these practices with those whose hands tremble under burden and invite quiet apprentices into small circles of support. By offering witness and technique, you help build a durable culture that honors fragility while cultivating courage. Return to the visual portal whenever you need refreshment or instruction and allow what you see to shape how you move among others. Stay steady and keep tending.